Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your sources, dig through them, and pull out the most important bits of knowledge and insight for you. Today, we're embarking on a really fascinating, kind of multifaceted exploration. We're looking into the whole world of predictions.
Yeah, it covers a lot of ground.
It really does.
Yeah.
We've got material from like specific economic forecasts, ancient prophecies, even looking back at the lingering shadows of events like 9/11 that still spark a lot of speculation. Our job here is to navigate all these intriguing claims, give you a clear, impartial view of what the sources actually say, separating the documented facts from the theories, and exploring maybe some surprising connections that pop up.
And what's really interesting is how different kinds of sources are. I mean, you've got financial newsletters, historical records, even anonymous online forums. They seem to converge on these themes of, well, significant change and uncertainty, especially when we look towards the near future. We'll be digging into claims of really precise market timing, those persistent questions around 9/11, and yeah, some pretty chilling forecasts for 2025 from different seers.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our sources really throw us right into the deep end with September 11th. It was such a pivotal moment, and even decades on, it's still this focal point for so many alternative theories.
Right.
Now, official investigations, the 9/11 Commission, NIST, they attribute the attacks, the collapses to Al-Qaeda, the plane, the fires that followed.
Stylish narrative.
Exactly. But our sources, they detail a whole range of theories that really challenge that commonly accepted version.
So that really begs the question, doesn't it? Why do these theories stick around? And what evidence or alleged evidence do the proponents say was, ignored or overlooked? It's interesting how quickly some of these ideas popped up. Some pretty elaborate theories were appearing in Europe just, a week after the attacks?
Yeah, and books like Tir Mason's L'Effroyable Imposture, The Terrible Deceit, they became bestsellers. Okay, let's start with one that connects to the financial side. The idea of insider trading.
Ah, yes, the trading anomalies.
Right. Our sources point to analyses showing this, suspicious jump in put option contracts for United and American Airlines. Those were the two airlines involved, of course.
And a put option is basically a bet the stock price will fall.
Exactly. So between September 6th and 7th, 2001, the Chicago Board Options Exchange apparently logged 4,744 put options for UAL, but only 396 call options bets the price would rise.
That's a huge difference.
It is. And then on September 10th, similar thing with American Airlines. 4,516 puts versus just 748 calls. The estimate was a trader could have potentially made like $5 million profit.
Okay, but putting this in the broader context, the 9/11 Commission looked into these allegations exhaustively. They spent a lot of time on it. And while they did acknowledge that, quote, some unusual trading did in fact occur, their conclusion was that every single one of those trades proved to have an innocuous explanation.
Innocuous, like what?
Well, for example, 95% of those UAL puts on September 6th, they traced them back to a single U.S.-based institutional investor, no ties to Al-Qaeda found. And a lot of that American Airlines trading on the 10th was apparently linked to a pretty standard U.S.-based options trading newsletter recommendation.
Ah, okay. So not necessarily sinister, according to the commission. Now, here's where it gets really interesting for a lot of people, based on our sources. The collapse of the World Trade Center towers.
The collapses themselves?
Official investigations say the North and South Towers. And later, 7 World Trade Center, which, remember, wasn't hit by a plane but collapsed hours later due to fires from debris. They blamed structural damage from the impacts and the intense fires.
Right.
But the alternative theories claim controlled demolition, pre-planted explosives.
Yeah, and this is a major point of contention, but a key thing from the material is that engineering and demolition experts widely dismiss these theories. Why? A lack of credible evidence.
Like the super thermite idea.
Exactly. Proponents like Stephen E. Jones suggested that, and they pointed to reports of molten metal in the rubble. But critics, like Brent Blanchard, bring up the huge logistical problem. How do you plant massive amounts of explosives in those buildings completely unnoticed?
Good point.
And they question the chain of custody for the beams that were supposedly tested. Then you have Dave Thomas from Skeptical Inquirer pointing out that thermite, yeah, it's hot, but it burns relatively slowly. Not ideal for demolition. It also needs special containment.
Wasn't there a demonstration too?
Yes, showing nanolimite failing to actually damage a steel beam. That further challenged the theory. And we need to remember the temperatures. Structural steel melts around, 1,500 degrees Celsius? Jet fuel fires typically burn much lower, maybe 260 to 315 C.
But steel weakens way before it melts, right?
Precisely. Steel loses half its strength at 600 C and 90% at about 980 C. So that weakening, combined with the fireproofing being knocked off during the impacts, that's what the official reports say led to the structural failures, not necessarily melting.
Okay, moving on. Another big area in the sources is the Pentagon attack.
Ah, the missile theory.
Yeah, some theories, like Thierry Mason promoted, claim Flight 77 didn't hit the Pentagon at all. They say it was a missile, pointing to the size of the initial hole being, well, too small for a Boeing 757.
But what's really striking here is the amount of contradictory evidence the sources cite. Even researchers within the 9/11 truth movement itself, like Jim Hoffman, refute the missile claims.
What evidence contradicts it?
Well, they found Flight 77's black boxes at the crash site. The nose cone, landing gear, an airplane tire, even an intact cockpit seat. Passenger remains were found and identified using DNA. Plus, foreign governments confirmed their citizens died on that specific flight. And maybe most compellingly, numerous eyewitnesses saw the plane hit the building.
And didn't passengers make calls from the plane?
They did, reporting the hijacking, mentioning details like knives and box cutters. That directly contradicts theories that the calls were somehow faked.
Okay, then there's the fourth plane, United 93, that crash in Pennsylvania. Official story, passengers fought back, alternative theory.
Shot down by a U.S. fighter jet. Proponents like David Ray Griffin, Alex Jones, they point to things like engine parts reportedly found miles away from the main wreckage site as potential evidence.
What do the agencies say?
Well, the sources indicate government agencies, like the FBI, they assert that a small white jet seen nearby was actually a Dassault Falcon business jet. It had been asked to fly over and survey the impact site, not fire anything, and Ben Sliney, who was the FAA operations manager that day, stated pretty clearly that no military aircraft were near Flight 93.
There's also that early news report, confusion, wasn't there?
Right, a report that Flight 93 landed safely in Ohio. That fueled some hoax theories, but the report was quickly retracted. Turned out it was confusion with a different flight, Delta 1989. You know, the sheer amount of wreckage at the Shanksville site, eyewitness accounts, plus the immense difficulty of secretly swapping one plane for another. These hoax ideas are pretty contentious, even within the broader 9/11 truth movement itself.
And the hijackers themselves, their identities became a subject of conspiracy too.
Yeah, that early confusion.
Huh.
The BBC published some names of individuals who were later found to be alive.
Which theorists jumped on as proof the hijackings were faked.
But if you connect that to the bigger picture, the BBC later explained it simply arose from common Arabic and Islamic names, just confusion in the initial chaos after the attacks. The FBI later affirmed they were confident in identifying all 19 hijackers. The New York Times also acknowledged these were cases of mistaken identity, clarifying that the confusion cleared up once the FBI released photographs.
Okay, finally, there are these theories involving foreign governments. Allegations about financing from Pakistan's ISI, the intelligence service, and claims of foreknowledge by Israeli intelligence, Mossad. Some proponents even claim thousands of Jewish employees were warned not to go to work on 9/11.
Right, the Mossad warning theory. This raises an important question, though. What do the actual casualty numbers show? That specific claim, which is often amplified by Hezbollah-owned media, seems to stem from a Jerusalem Post article. But it reported about 4,000 Israelis believed to have been in the area of the attacks, not necessarily working in the towers or warned beforehand.
Ah, crucial distinction.
A very crucial one. The actual number of Jewish victims is estimated somewhere between 270 and 400, which sadly aligns pretty closely with the percentage of Jewish people living in the New York area at the time. The U.S. State Department even published a partial list of 76 victims in response to those claims, and we know 5 Israeli citizens tragically died in the attack.
Other claims involved alleged Saudi royal family support for some hijackers and the idea of a Bush administration cover-up.
Yeah, and what's interesting there is that investigative journalists Anthony Summers and Robin Swan really dug into this in their book, The 11th Day. A Lloyd's insurance syndicate even started legal action against Saudi Arabia, demanding repayment for victim compensation.
And the idea that 9/11 was a pretext for war.
That's another persistent theme. Did it give the U.S. and U.K. a justification for the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq? However, the sources also note that the Bush administration specifically rejected initial proposals to attack Iraq immediately after 9/11, acknowledging there was no evidence linking Iraq to the attacks.
So we've seen how the past gets dissected, looking for hidden meanings, alternative stories. And that same impulse, that drive to understand or predict, definitely extends to looking forward.
Absolutely.
Our sources offer this fascinating mix of prophecies and predictions, especially focused on the year 2025. Let's dive into those now, maybe starting with some really specific contemporary financial forecasts.
Yeah, one that really stands out in the sources is this Amanita Market Forecasting newsletter. It's quite something. They claim to have predicted March 29th, 2025 as a, quote, central timeline for the year, a point from which they said everything will change fundamentally. They even called it the rebirth of the world. Pretty dramatic language.
It really is, and the precision they claim is, well, remarkable. The newsletter apparently stated that within days of that March 29th date, there was, and I'm quoting again, one of the largest stock market crashes in history, as well as the fastest economic crisis in history. They specifically cited April 4th or 7th, 2025 as the most dramatic moment in the history of the stock markets, with the highest trading volume ever seen in U.S. stocks.
Okay, so placing that in broader context, this Amanita system claims they made massive profits because they were long volatility.
Which means betting on big market swings, right?
Exactly, betting on turbulence. They claim the VSTOXX, which is Europe's volatility index, tripled in just 2 weeks. And the VIX, the U.S. equivalent, often called the fear index, supposedly exploded fourfold in 6 weeks.
That's huge volatility.
Massive. They even claim they timed selling their volatility positions almost at the hour on April 7th, 2025, based on what they called a crystal clear instruction from God.
From God.
That's what the source states. This service also describes themselves as the biggest inflation-adjusted stock bears. They predict that even if stock indices add zeros during hyperinflation, like we've seen in Iran, Turkey, Venezuela, they actually collapse in real value terms. And they suggest this very question will apply to Western markets in 2025 or 2026.
So that's one specific financial forecast. But moving beyond that, prophecies for this period seem quite common in our sources.
Yeah, they are.
People like Stephen Berndt and Chuck Johnel Youngbrand, for instance, they're cited as talking about a severe economic crisis around March, April 2025, with the USA being completely cut off from world trade.
And some more recent prophecies supposedly stated very specifically that the U.S. economy would collapse right after a dictator seized power on January 20th, 2025. Very precise, very political.
Then we have the historical figures. Nostradamus, 16th century French astrologer.
Ah, Nostradamus. Always popular.
Despite his really cryptic quatrains, some people credit him with foreseeing just about everything: Napoleon, world wars, 9/11, even modern tech.
So what about 2025 according to interpretations?
Well, the interpretations cited include a plague outbreak in the UK, an asteroid collision called the Harbinger of Fate, the rise of machine rising, which people take to mean AI and robotics,
Okay.
major cyber threats to global infrastructure, big advances in space exploration with lights in the sky and new worlds discovered, and a really volatile global economy, fortunes being lost overnight. He also apparently warns of catastrophic floods, coastal devastation, a lot going on.
A very busy year.
Seems so. And then there's Baba Vanga, the blind Bulgarian mystic.
Mm-hmm.
She's also credited with predicting 9/11, maybe even COVID-19.
Right, another famous seer.
Her resurfaced prophecies for 2025 supposedly warn of a devastating European war, general global upheaval, including economic collapse, natural disasters, shattering earthquakes, basically signaling the beginning of humanity's downfall.
Bleak.
Very. She even apparently predicted World War III being triggered by the collapse of Syria.
You know, it's compelling how these two figures, Nostradamus from centuries ago, Baba Vanga more recently, both seem to hint through interpretations at 2025 being just packed with conflict and disaster.
Were there any modern-day prophets mentioned?
Yes, we also have figures referred to as living Nostradamuses, like the Brazilian psychic Athos Salome. He apparently predicted a Microsoft global outage and now foresees a global tech blackout linked to an EMP attack. That's an electromagnetic pulse, could wipe out electronics. He calls it the 3-day darkness.
Wow.
He also predicts a new era of AI-driven conflict, possibly sparking World War III, maybe originating from the South China Sea or a major cyber attack.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to something more esoteric. Our sources mention these almost tetrads.
Right, the lunar eclipses.
Yeah, 4 lunar eclipses happening in a row, all on Jewish holidays. The current series mentioned spans from March 14th, 2025 to August 28th, 2026.
And this phenomenon, it's considered pretty extraordinary, isn't it? Sometimes only happens once every 300 years or so.
Exactly. And historically, they've been linked in some interpretations to significant spiritual events, things like the crucifixion of Jesus or the end of the Islamic presence on the Iberian Peninsula way back when.
So what's the supposed significance of this current series?
Well, the sources say it's believed to culminate around 2032-33, marking the third and final climax of the end times, supposedly 2,000 years, precisely after the tetrad associated with the crucifixion.
Hmm.
And related to this, there's a contemporary mystic mentioned, Luz de Maria de Bonilla. She's apparently revealing 5 secrets. The fourth one is said to be revealed on March 18th, 2025, and the final one expected in July 2025. These are seen by some as a kind of countdown for other major prophecies.
A lot of intersecting timelines and predictions there.
Definitely. And perhaps the most unusual claims in our sources come from a Manfred Zimmel.
Ah, yes, so the UFOs.
Right. He states a UFO invasion actually began around November 19th or 20th, 2024. He connects it to Pluto entering Aquarius, correlating with what he calls the largest wave of UFO sightings in history.
Okay. And his claims for 2025.
He claims personal UFO encounters, even abduction attempts in
Mm.
March 2025. Says he heard a loud UFO drone, saw people screaming wildly on the street in a place called Altening. He specifically warns against false UFO raptures.
False UFO raptures. Okay, so this is really a fascinating mix, isn't it? Financial forecasting, ancient prophecies, mystical revelations, and even extraterrestrial claims all converging around this near future period. It really reminds us that interpreting prophecies, or any prediction really, is incredibly complex. And as our sources themselves note, the fulfillment of these things is, quote, almost never recognized by most people at the time. It emphasizes that in these belief systems, God always has the last word, and the element of surprise is on his side.
What a journey through these sources today. Really quite something. We've covered a lot, from those enduring questions about 9/11, the Twin Tower collapses, to these incredibly specific financial predictions for 2025, and then these sweeping ancient prophecies talking about global upheaval, tech changes, even celestial signs.
Yeah, and what really stands out is that human drive, isn't it? The drive to see patterns, to try and predict what's coming next, and maybe fundamentally to find explanations for things that seem unexplainable, whether that's through, meticulous financial number crunching, interpreting historical texts, or looking at esoteric visions. It really highlights the powerful stories we build around major events, past and future.
So what does all this mean for you listening in as you think about this deep dive into predictions and how they interact, sometimes uncomfortably, with reality? Maybe consider this.
Uh-huh.
In a world just flooded with information, with claims coming from every direction, how do you develop the critical discernment needed to figure out what's reliable information versus just speculation, especially when some claims are so detailed, so specific, yet others are so broad, so open to interpretation? How do we navigate that?